Hey everyone, this is David Chalian, the CNN political director, and this is the Daily DC. Thanks so much for listening. Today on the podcast, now what? Now what? Now that the President of the United States has lost touch with the country he represents, now that the President has completely abdicated the moral authority that comes with that office, now that the President has made clear that he is incapable of representing all Americans as the leader of the country, now what? Now, where do Americans turn? Who steps up into what is probably the biggest leadership vacuum I've ever witnessed in my lifetime? And these are not easy. This is not an easy question for me to pose. I spend my professional life covering politics, and covering the policy and politics of our leaders, our candidates seeking to become our elected leaders. And it is a job that constantly requires us to talk to people from all sides of the ideological spectrum, get their points of view. There's a lot of left versus right and cutting through the rhetoric and strategy to get to the core of what is being promised and delivered to the American people. That's not the case here. This is actually, while it is the very essence of politics, because it is about the people, this is not about traditional politics. This is not a left-right issue. This is not an ideological issue. This is not Trump supporters versus those that don't support Donald Trump. That's not what this is. This is the President of the United States thoroughly and completely abdicating the moral responsibility and the moral authority that comes with the office. And he completely revealed himself to the country. He did it on Saturday when his initial instincts about the Charlottesville incidents of hate and bigotry and anti-Semitism and racism, when that was all being conducted in Charlottesville on Saturday, he gave us a sense of where his instincts were on this when he said many sides, many sides. He then goes in front of a teleprompter on Monday and tries to course correct with a prepared written script for him to read, where he actually does denounce by name what he did not do on Saturday, the KKK, anti-Semites, neo-Nazis, racists. He did it by name, white supremacists. And then yesterday, he was back to somehow making what is just inconceivable, a moral equivalency, some sort of equivalency between the Nazis, the neo-Nazis who showed up there in Charlottesville, and those that were protesting against them. There is no equivalency. So I want you to hear what Donald Trump said in Trump Tower yesterday while standing behind a lectern that held the seal of the presidency of the United States of America on it. Here's the president.
I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about
No, both sides. There's one side to this issue, and Donald Trump is not on it. He's not on the right side here. He's not on the side of the American people here. And that requires everyone's attention. That requires, and it is an extra burden for his fellow Republicans, for his fellow party members on Capitol Hill in leadership positions, to step up and call this out. Some of them are, many of them are, and there's a whole range of responses, right? If you look among all the Republican responses, you're getting everything from Cory Gardner and Marco Rubio and Jerry Moran of Kansas out there calling the president out by name, John McCain saying our president must not give voice to this hatred, to this bigotry. Our president must not, it must be fully rejected by name, and there can be no equivalency. That is what you hear from some folks. Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell don't seem to want to pick a fight with President Trump personally over this, so they are out there with very strong statements of course, denouncing what occurred in Charlottesville, placing blame on the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, the KKK who showed up to spew racist and anti-Semitic remarks. They are out there doing exactly what you would want from leaders, which is completely denouncing that, not equivocating, not trying to say, well, but there were also no. There is no well. As soon as you start that second sentence, stop. And that's what Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell are doing. What they're not doing is calling on the president by name to get right with the American people on this. They are making their point clear, obviously, in their statements, that they don't stand with him on this. I don't think they'd be issuing those statements if President Trump didn't make those remarks you just heard. But they're not out there taking him on directly over this. And in fact, they will continue to sort of struggle, as they have, with how to manage this. They don't want, certainly in the case of Mitch McConnell, to make it personal and seem like we're back in the last week's story of retribution now. Oh, Mitch McConnell's coming after Donald Trump. I get that. I get why he would not want to do that. And yet, their positions of being the leaders of the House and the Senate may require more here. As the country looks again to who is going to fill the leadership vacuum. Here's another example of a critique the president's getting from his own party. Lindsey Graham, who obviously is no stranger to critiquing Donald Trump, ran against him in the primaries and has not really been a fan, though did praise his comments on Monday. When the president did that makeup session and tried to stick to script and correct what did not go right on Saturday, Lindsey Graham praised that statement. But then the president went out to Trump Tower yesterday, and you heard him in the lobby. You just heard what he said, and so this is Lindsey Graham's response. Mr. President, I encourage you to try to bring us together as a nation after this horrific event in Charlottesville. Your words are dividing Americans, not healing them. Through his statements yesterday, President Trump took a step backward by again suggesting there is moral equivalency between the white supremacist neo-Nazis and KKK members who attended the Charlottesville rally and people like Ms. Heyer. That's the woman who was killed and whose life is being memorialized today. I, along with many others, Graham continues, do not endorse this moral equivalency. Many Republicans do not agree with and will fight back against the idea that the party of Lincoln has a welcome mat out for the David Dukes of the world. Speaking of the David Dukes of the world, you may have seen his statement yesterday. He clearly heard what he wanted to hear in Donald Trump's comments yesterday. The former Grand Wizard of the KKK, David Duke, was praising what Trump said. He thanked Trump for his honesty and his courage. How the President of the United States, any President of the United States, can allow his public words to be perceived by the Grand Wizard of the KKK as courageous and honest words. How that could be left open to the interpretation, even at its, if that's the worst, if that's all that happened here, that would be a problem. That David Duke is able to interpret because the words aren't clear enough, sharp enough, the rebuke is not strong enough, and there is moral equivalency offered. David Duke can take the President of the United States' words and see honesty and courage. How does the President of the United States allow that? How does he allow that to happen? And it is that question that I think is going to continue to haunt Republicans, Democrats, independents, the country overall. But it is also the larger question that I started with here of where to from here. So what now? Are these words and responses from Republicans enough, or is there some action to be done here? Is there some way in which the Congress needs to act, whether it is sort of moving alone on an agenda, on a policy agenda, and no longer worried about the White House or Donald Trump's priorities? Is it to further isolate themselves from the president? I don't know what the actions are, but I know right now all we've got is words, and it seems like words may not be enough here. Because the president sees all these words and still goes out and makes this comment that he made yesterday. Words may have been enough. If we had Saturday happen, all of these leaders issued these statements, challenged the president to get out there and correct it. He did. Then you could say, oh, that's the power of words. That's the power of people in his own party standing up and making public statements. And it got him in the right place. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case, because then he went out yesterday and made those comments where he has just fully given away the moral authority of the presidency. It's not just members of Congress, by the way. 2 former presidents of the United States have now issued a joint statement. I will note that they are the only 2 living former Republican presidents, George H.W. Bush and his son George W. Bush. Only 2 former presidents that were Republicans, that are Republicans, and currently living, issued a joint statement to the current Republican president, their successor in the Oval Office. Though they do not name President Trump at all in this statement, it is clear it is being issued the day after President Trump's statements were made at Trump Tower. The Bushes say, America must always reject racial bigotry, anti-Semitism, and hatred in all forms. As we pray for Charlottesville, we are reminded of the fundamental truths recorded by that city's most prominent citizen in the Declaration of Independence. We are all created equal and endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights. We know these truths to be everlasting because we have seen the decency and greatness of our country. It doesn't say Dear Donald Trump at the beginning of that statement, but it's clearly implied. That's from George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush. Perhaps a little crack in the former President's Club, the most exclusive club in the world, the President's Club. And there are 5 former living presidents, and the 2 Bushes issued this statement today, clearly hoping to get Donald Trump's attention in doing so. Again, I think it's been proven by now that this will not be the kind of thing that has lasting impact on President Trump. So we will continue to look for the fallout. Is there anybody in the White House staff, anybody in the senior circle around the president who jumped ship because they believe now the president is so far off course with his leadership of the country? No signals of that yet. There's going to be a whole narrative about where were Jared and Ivanka, his daughter and son-in-law. Jews, by the way. His daughter and son-in-law, who are also the parents of Donald Trump's Jewish grandchildren. Where were they? They're on vacation in Vermont. There seems to be a pattern that when Jared and Ivanka are on vacation, controversy strikes this White House in a way that perhaps they could have been some sort of countervailing force against the president from doing something as reckless as he did yesterday. But they're not around, so that'll be a storyline to follow as well and get their reaction to what the president said. And then it is those Republican leaders in Congress. The burden is on them. I understand that Donald Trump was not a traditional Republican. I understand just a few years ago he was donating to Hillary Clinton. A few years before that he was a pro-choice person on the matter of abortion. I get that he is a different kind of Republican. But he ran in the Republican primary. He won the party's nomination. He was elected president of the United States under the banner of the Republican Party. And when you heard the chairwoman of the Republican Party this morning, Donald Trump's hand-picked chairwoman, Mitt Romney's niece, Ronna Romney McDaniel, on morning television this morning, she said all the right words. She, of course, politically was trying to ignore that yesterday happened, did not want to engage at all on the issue of moral equivalency, which is a mark against her. She should have struck back on the president's moral equivalency and called him out for it. That would have been a profile in courage. But instead she sidestepped that and just gave the language that Donald Trump should have been giving all along. And she said to those neo-Nazis and those racists and those anti-Semites, we don't want your votes. Keep them. Stay home. Don't give us your votes. The Republican Party, and you heard it in the chairwoman this morning, has a brand problem now because of Donald Trump here. There's going to be a significant brand problem for the party even though he is not of the party. And therefore, it is incumbent upon the leadership of the Republican Party, the leaders in Congress, to figure out how they're going to move the country in a united fashion through this moment. And I think the jury is still out on that as they scramble to figure out where to from here. That does it for this edition of the Daily DC. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you'll tune in again right here tomorrow.